Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dark Crossroads. This is your host, Roxanne Fletcher, and today we're doing another segment of Creepy Corner. These are episodes where I read stories that are sent in to us. If you want your story read on Creepy Corner, whether it be true crime, paranormal, or anything else that you want read, we want to hear it all. Just email it to us at darkcrossroadspodcast@gmail.com. But with that said, let's get into some of these stories. With these stories, I've been trying to do a theme lately with each episode. Last week was aliens appropriately, and this week I decided to go a little bit broader and I did creepy or scary encounters. So when I choose a theme, I just kind of pull it out of the email or other areas that it was sent into me. So our first story says, when I was about 8 years old, I was deep in the woods at my uncle's house. All of our parents went out to do something and the 5 kids, ages 4 to 14 years old, stayed at home. We were playing a hide-and-seek game in the house with no lights on. There were no street lights or anything else, so you couldn't see anything at all. The base was in the living room, and I hid in the living room so I could quickly get to base. My brother, who was 11 at the time, was it. He was doing his countdown, and I was hiding just a couple of feet from him. But suddenly, a lightning strike drew our attention to the window. We were both shocked to see the outline of a man at the window trying to see in. We instantly started whispering, and on the next lightning strike, the guy was starting to walk to the front door. My brother quickly ran to lock the door. I know, but it was a different time and a different place. And he got there right before the guy started shaking the handle. My brother started flipping on the lights, presumably so the guy would know that people were home and hoping that he would leave. He yelled for me to lock the other doors. I ran and I locked the kitchen door and then the sliding glass door at the back of the house. As I was locking that door, the guy was suddenly there, standing there on the other side of the glass. I was frozen, but my brother calmly told me to close the curtain, and I focused on his voice and I did what he said. Now my uncle had guns, but his son was gone on a hunting trip, so all we could do was find a BB gun. It was what looked more like a rifle than anything else. Ben, my brother, stepped out on the porch with the gun, the BB gun, trying to make the guy believe that we were armed. They constantly had phone issues. This was going way back, but they had a party line, and we couldn't get the phone to work to make a call. We were trying to call someone on my uncle's CB radio, but we weren't getting anyone. Eventually, an older cousin who was only like 15 himself showed up, and we thought an adult was there and we had been saved. This calmed us down and we went back to normal, I guess. I'm not sure I've ever had a creepier moment than looking up at the window and seeing someone on the other side. Okay, this is our next story. I once lived in a trailer park for a couple of years, and one night I was sitting up in bed facing the window, watching TV on my phone. I happened to look up and suddenly saw a shadow walking between mine and my neighbor's yard. It was really late at night, and I knew no one would be outside at this time. I texted my neighbor telling her about it and asked if she had seen anything. A few nights later, me and a couple of the neighborhood women were walking down the little road in the trailer park when we started to hear twigs and branches being snapped. It stopped when we stopped walking and continued if we took a step. Since it was dark and across the road, we couldn't see what it was. It freaked us out a little bit. Then, that's when things got weird. Stuff outside would go missing, and on some nights, a fire could be seen across the road and the creek near a big cave on the mountainside. Whenever somebody would loudly say they see a fire, within minutes the fire would be out. We all thought maybe a homeless man was living in the cave and that possibly was harmless, but that changed when two guys were walking in the trailer park late at night and came across a man trying to break into my window. From what the guys told the police, this strange man was standing outside my kid's bedroom window trying to lift it up when they screamed at him and he took off running for the mountain. Police searched around the trailer park and under a few trailers where they found a makeshift bed, a bucket, and a flashlight under my neighbor's trailer. The more I read these stories, the more freaked out I am to just go to the grocery store because I don't know what the hell. And also, the more I read these stories on this podcast, the more I have noticed I have been making sure every one of my doors are locked before I go to bed and all of the blinds are shut. Alright, let's just jump into our next story. When I was 17 years old, I worked at a candy store at the mall. This guy stayed from opening till closing and he kept trying to talk to me. We had great conversations, but I felt uncomfortable when he stayed for closing and waited for me to finish. He even helped me close. We walked to my car and I stupidly drove him to his car. I'm lucky nothing bad happened, but then the next day came and I had to open that day and he was waiting there for me. He brought me McDonald's and noticed I was slightly annoyed and creeped out, so he left it at the gate and left. I didn't eat it since I was skeptical. He came back and followed me around the store and wouldn't leave me alone until I told him off. He found my Instagram and kept texting me then. I blocked him. I will never do that again. Okay, this one's very scary because this could have escalated very quickly, and I am very glad to hear that so far, hopefully, nothing has happened to you and that he got the hint and went away. But this does sound like a creepy stalker. Okay, on to our next story. My mother worked in home care for the elderly and or disabled. Part of her job involved cooking meals for people, but sometimes when she would get there, she would find that their kitchen was empty and she would have to take the person grocery shopping. This was against the rules. She could have been fired for it, but she wasn't going to leave somebody's elderly granny alone in an apartment with no food. How nice of her. So one afternoon, just coming back from the store with the little old lady she was helping, a man pushed his way into the apartment behind them. He had a weapon, a gun I think, ordered them to stay quiet, ordered the old lady out of the room, and then started trying to get my mom's jeans off. Up until that point, my mom was mostly worried about her client getting hurt, but right then she suddenly remembered some Bible verse about how women are supposed to yell and make noise during a forced situation like so, that nobody can claim it as consensual. So she started screaming while trying to fight him off, and that's when the old lady tottered out of her bedroom, armed with pepper spray. She got the jerk right in the eyes, and he was stumbling out of the front door. She loved my mom, and she couldn't stand to hear her terrified screaming, so found a way to save her. The cops never caught the guy, even though he left his coat behind and everything else. That's awesome. Go Granny, right? Alrighty, so on to our next story. I was running really late to work one day. It was the early morning, around 7 a.m. I was driving down the highway to get to the interstate when I noticed a child, maybe 4 years old, trying to ride his bike down a hill. I thought, well, that's weird, but I guess it's not my problem, and I can't afford to be late again. Someone else will hopefully help. But as I drove past, I got this feeling in my gut that said, turn the frick around. Yes, turn around. Don't be... Turn around! I turn around and I park a few feet ahead of him to meet him in the middle. I asked him what he's doing and if his parents know where he is. Naturally, he's concerned, and I tell him I'm not going to take him and I just want to make sure he's safe and I'm going to call the cops. I get his name and that he lives up the street in the rich area. Found out he was trying to go to McDonald's down the hill. After I've called the cops, another car pulls up. A couple gets out, and they are clearly tweakers who live in the trailer park, which is nowhere near where this kid lives. They have missing teeth and just look like their life has been nothing but poor decisions. The woman tries to act like she knows him and where he lives. When I ask her what his name is and where they live, she doesn't tell me because I could be trying to take him. I tell her no, and that I have already called the cops. She continues to try and push for them to take him home, even attempting to pick him up. I take out my pepper spray and I say, "Back the frick up. You didn't give me a name and where he lives. You are not taking him anywhere." I'm shaking and I'm terrified, having this child cling to my leg at this point, unsure if I just brought pepper spray to a gunfight. The woman backs up, says she'll wait for the cops. The guy with her is clearly uncomfortable and looks like he wants to get out of there. They waited till the cops came, and naturally, as I was talking to an officer, for some reason, they let her pick him up. The boy looked incredibly uncomfortable in her arms. I told an officer I didn't think they had good intentions, and they were trying to take him before the cops got there. Told him she couldn't even give me his name and where he lived for knowing him. I saw an officer take the kid from the woman and put him in his car. It's the only reason things didn't escalate. I was fully prepared to make sure that this kid got home without these creeps knowing where it was. I didn't hear anything more aside from a call that he got home safe. To this day, I am 99% sure that I stopped a child from going missing. I hope that this kid is still good and hopefully learned to go to McDonald's with his parents and not on his own. From that day, I learned to always trust my gut and to never fall for the someone else will help mindset. Because despite all this shit that happened, no one else stopped. Me, a woman, barely 19 years old, was there standing up to tweakers, and no one stopped to help me or this kid, just slowed down to see what was going on. The bystander effect. It is very common, but this story teaches you that maybe just stopping for a few minutes can save a life. Literally. Good on you. Alrighty, so on to our next story. 20 plus years ago, my husband at the time and I decided to go camping on the Indian reservation in Arizona. We took our 2 dogs and we drove on dirt roads for miles. We passed only one car on the drive-in. We were literally isolated and miles from any town. We arrived just before dark and dusk was setting in, and we found a place just off the road in the trees. I should add here that both my ex and I were seasoned campers and normally very confident. We started getting camp set up and both the dogs started acting very strange and were growling toward the bushes and the trees to the west of us, yet not going in to investigate like they normally would. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Never have I felt the urgency to get out and get out fast. We were alone, in the middle of absolutely nowhere and completely vulnerable. We both decided at the same time we needed to leave, ASAP. It was now getting almost completely dark, and I was afraid at any moment somebody was going to come out of the trees. We threw everything into the back of the truck, and I was literally shaking by the time we left. I didn't feel safe until we were miles down the road. It was such an eerie feeling. We drove all the way home that night. We both felt we avoided something majorly dangerous that night if we would have camped there. I believed that someone was out there and waiting for us to get in the tent and fall asleep. Never had anything like that happen before or since. Alright, this is our next story. I was almost kidnapped when I was 15 years old. I was walking home from school late since I had after-school club. Normally I would get a ride home since my high school was pretty far, but no one in my family could pick me up this day. I was walking down the boulevard when a man in a black pickup truck driving the opposite direction of me waved and honked at me. I honestly thought nothing of it until he U-turned and he started driving next to me as I was walking. He asked me if I wanted a job, and this is when I started to know that something was happening here and I needed an excuse, and fast. So I pretended to not know what he was saying and told him my English was not good. I'm actually an Asian immigrant, but I speak fluent English since I grew up in the US. Once I neared the crosswalk, he quickly drove in the parking lot on the corner and kept trying to lure me into his car. This is when shit gets terrifying for me. He took out a fat stack of $100 bills. It actually scared me because this man could have anything on him if that stack was real. I just gave him this look which told him, I'm not stupid, dude. And I ran in the neighborhood once the crosswalk lit since he couldn't get to me in the time from the parking lot. I kept running. I ran in the neighborhood until I'm pretty sure I lost him. Also, I stood outside this house that had people working on the lawn just in case he was still following me, and I was tired from running, honestly. After maybe about 5 minutes, I went back to the avenue, since I needed to walk through there to get home. Luckily, a mom was walking with her kids, so I just walked really close to them on the way home. After that, I never walked home from my high school ever again. I just waited late on campus if I needed to, or I got a ride from my friends, since this is when they were starting to get their driver's licenses. I'm 21 now, and I still get very anxious and nervous whenever I see a black pickup truck. If I have to walk somewhere, I cover myself, or I make myself look more masculine. If I didn't have luck that day, I wouldn't be having a normal life, or even probably be alive right now. Okay, so this next story, the first time I read it, I got full body goosebumps, like chills up my spine. I don't know if it's because I know what it's like to be alone at home with a newborn. It really got to me. So let's just see what you guys think about it. I was newly married living on a military base. People think that all military housing is behind the wire, but it's not. Usually, it's just housing estates in very close proximity to the camp. My husband and his CO were out doing an arms check for the local cadets, and I was home alone with my then 6-month-old baby. Our house was at the bottom of a road, where there was a cut that led out to a main road and towards the train station directly behind our house. It was winter, so dark, and it was getting dark early. My dog suddenly started growling, and I could hear some sort of scraping sound. I opened the door leading into the passage where the front door was. The dog was right with me, hackles raised, and he was starting to get angrier. To the side of our front door was a glass panel, running the full vertical length. Is that a man? He stood there, dragging his nails down the glass and just staring at me. Hood up, I couldn't see his face. I never screamed so loudly in my entire life. Now, I grew up in a shithole area, but I knew everyone, and to be honest, I have never felt more scared. That night, I was terrified. My dog was launching herself at the door. I kept it locked when home alone, and the guy ran. I rang my husband, who was on his way back and only 10 minutes away. Him and his CO started speeding back and called the MPs. All went searching, but found nothing. This absolutely fucked me up. One thing's for sure, if he somehow ever got in, I knew my dog would put herself between me and whoever broke in. Just the thought of the creepy scratching, I don't know what it is about that, but that would mess me up too. Alrighty, so on to our next story. Back on Halloween 2019, my friends and I decided, hey, we should go to this abandoned nursing home for shits and gigs. So we started the journey. But on the way, we see a duplex, 1-floor building in the woods, abandoned. So we decided to stop there real quick, just to explore since, hey, it's Halloween. We adventure the property for about 20 minutes and then eventually decide, alright, let's go back through real quick and see if we missed anything. So we head back towards the first door that we went to. Right as we approached this door, the most blood-curdling scream broke the absolute silent night. I am talking metal to chalkboard type of scream that was one continuous note. We absolutely hightailed it out of there, literally tripping over sticks and shit, trying to get the frick away from whatever we heard. We left there, and we went to the nursing home first mentioned. Nothing interesting happened, so when we were riding home, we stopped at the building again to see if it was a siren or if something was behind the building. We searched for 20 minutes, behind, in front of, and every room again, and the sound never repeated itself. I haven't touched an abandoned building since, cause, that shit was terrifying. Okay, so this next story, I don't know if it's a glitch in the Matrix or what it could be. If you have any idea, please email it to me because I want to hear everybody's theories on this. Alright, so it says, I'm sure there's got to be something I'm missing here, but here it goes. When I just recently learned to drive, I would pick my friends up and we'd go driving around all the really remote back roads in rural Ireland, stopping off at anything interesting that we saw. There were lots of abandoned cottages and farmhouses and lanes that ran single track into the woods, and all that fun stuff. We would drive around and try to freak one another out, the usual. One night it was just me and one other friend, Connor. We were on one of the narrow single-track roads with thick trees on one side and an increasingly steep rock wall on the other. The road got narrower, and as I turned the road, we came suddenly face to face with this huge structure. It looked like one of those old water viaducts or an arched railway bridge, but it was very tall and very narrow. I suppose it could have been a viaduct, but it definitely wasn't a railway bridge. It was unexpected and pretty cool, a little spooky coming out of nowhere in the dark like that, but we drove under one of the arches and had no incident. After about 10 minutes of driving along, we come across it again. This time it came slowly out of the darkness ahead of us. We didn't turn the same corner. Alright, I suppose I turned a gradual corner or something without realizing. We made some jokes about it being cursed or whatever, and drove under it again. Then, we came across it again. After another few minutes of driving, it was definitely the same one each time. Now, we're thinking this is a bit weird, but also a bit whatever. Maybe the road spirals or something, I don't know. Under we go again, and I'm sure you can guess what happened a few minutes later. All in all, we probably drove under that same arch 8 or 9 times. We're getting gradually more freaked out because there's no other turns off of this road, and we're sure that the landscape would not be able to suppose a road that winds around so intensely. We've actively looked for corners, gradual turns, ways to turn off the road, and have found nothing. Finally, when we came across the arch again, I put the car in reverse, and I backed up down the same road. Suddenly, there was only a gradual turn or two, and then, way sooner than I should have, I backed out onto the main road we'd initially turned off of. Aside from those gradual turns, it was practically a straight road. Because we're idiots, the next week, we went back to show some other friends. Despite literal hours of driving and being convinced we were on the same road, we did not find these arches. I also haven't found them on anything like Google Maps. I'm sure I somehow got turned around or something, but it was so weird. Alrighty, so on to our next story. This happened a while ago, but I still remember it very clearly. I was hunting in the northern woods of Wisconsin when I was about 15 years old. It was my first time going out and also my first time I was left alone with a gun, so being a teenager, I was pretty excited. We woke up at 5:30 a.m. and left before the sun rose above the horizon. Arriving on the trail, I walked to my ground stand alongside my brother, my cousin, and my father. Our stands were all aligned in a distant row, separated a few hundred feet. Located on the edge of an old logging road, the stands were easy to find. The stands ran perpendicular to the logging road, forming a straight line along the top of a hill in the dense forest. This wasn't your open field type of hunting land. This was real wilderness hunting land. My stand was the closest to the logging road, so upon our arrival, my father helped me settle in before continuing through the dark forest with my brother and my cousin. I got situated, and he went on his way. I watched the light of his headlamp disappear into the trees, and I waited for the sun to rise before loading my gun, as the season doesn't start until the sun comes up. Checking my watch, I saw it was about 6:15 a.m., so I had some time to kill. I decided to spend the next hour or so catching up on the sleep that I missed the previous night. When I woke, though, it was because of a cold gust of wind that knocked snow into my lap. I jolted up and immediately checked my watch. It was 9:30 a.m. Suddenly I thought, fuck, I overslept, and God knows how many deer I could have missed. After sulking in my stand, I felt pressure in my bladder and a need to relieve myself. I picked up my gun, I chambered it. I walked backward behind my stand, some 100 feet or so, to make sure that there would be no scent for the deer to pick up on. I opened my zipper and looked around as I did my business. In the dense white tree line, I noticed 3 men in blaze orange gathered together in a triangle. They all seemed to be talking with each other. At first I thought it might have been my brother, my father, and my cousin. However, this was kind of weird. It actually was very weird. We have been the only family to hunt this land in the past 50 years. Once I finished, I picked up my gun and unloaded it before using my scope to sight out the group of people. I definitely was not hallucinating. It was 3 men, huddled together, guns slung on their shoulders. I made sure to take a good look at every feature I could pick up on. One man wore a thick, fuzzy hat that was all orange. Another man sported a stereotypical lumberjack beard, and the final man wore wireframe aviators, much like Dwight Schrute. As I panned back across the group, the man with the wire-framed glasses looked back at me through the scope. I had caught their attention, and fearing them to be game wardens, I dropped the scope from my eye. My heart rate hit the roof, and I began fumbling with the magazine I had unloaded. While scrambling to fit the magazine in the gun, I had managed to drop my glove in the snow. I bent down to pick it up, and once I looked up, the men were gone. Having realized the mistake I had made by pointing my gun at what could be DNR agents, I wanted to find them to explain the situation. I continued through the dense trees and saw the spot where the men were standing. Upon arriving at this point, I examined the snow, which was completely undisturbed. There were no footprints, and my heart rate quickened, and I stopped to look around to see if I could see any orange through the brush. There was nothing around me. I was alone with the trees and the snow. I abandoned my search and I returned to my stand, anxiously waiting for the end of the day so I could report to my father what I had seen. Once we made it back to our cabin, I berated him with questions. We're the only people that hunt up here, right? Did you, my brother, and my cousin, stay in your stands all day long? And, of course, did you see anyone walking around you guys? Because I did. My dad thought I was lying to him, as it was nearly impossible that other people had begun to hunt on this very remote piece of land. It felt like I was in those horror movies where the main character tries telling the others of the danger, yet nobody will listen. My father eventually talked me down, and I relaxed, convincing myself it was a group of new guys who were probably testing out the land. Before I fell asleep that night, I began to examine the pictures beside my bed. What I saw turned me as pale as the sheet that covered me. 3 men, 3 different pictures. A 4th picture with 1969 written on the back contained all 3 of them. They were posed around a giant buck that had bled out in the snow. One man wore a thick, fuzzy orange hat, the other man had a long, dark-haired beard, and the 3rd man wore wire-framed glasses. I sprung up out of my bed with the pictures and confronted my father. "Who are these guys, Dad?" I asked. "Oh, you wouldn't know them," he replied, returning his attention to the card game in front of him. "Those are the fellows that built this cabin back in '46, after the war." I felt as if I had gotten much colder after he said that, but I pressed on. "Who is this guy?" I asked, pointing to the man with the wireframe glasses. "That's your grandfather," my dad said. My grandpa had been dead for years, ever since I was 9 years old. In fact, all of them had been dead for years. I will never forget the look my grandfather gave me through the scope. He seemed angry with me based on the way his brow was furrowed. I will never forget that day. Okay, so this next story is crazy. I think you guys are going to love it. I'll try to keep this short and sweet, but I, being a female 19 years old at the time, was rear-ended late on a Saturday night in Orlando. Needless to say, the police were pretty busy with more serious calls than a simple rear-ended accident. The guy who hit me was super sweet. He felt awful. He admitted he was looking at his phone and just didn't see my car because his truck was lifted so high. Now, this guy was a massive, over 300-pound, over 6-foot tall linebacker type of dude. He acted like a teddy bear, though. After about 45 minutes into us waiting on the police to arrive, he climbed in his truck because his wife was yelling at him on the phone, and I was on the phone with my mother because she was worried about the area that we were in. It was not a good place to be late at night. Just as she was telling me she would come so I wouldn't be there with just a guy alone, someone tapped me on the shoulder. Now, keep in mind, it's almost pitch black. The street light was broken, of course. And I turn around and I see this small guy with the creepiest smile on his face I have ever seen. It all happened so fast. The guy who hit me, the linebacker guy, tackled this small creepy guy out of nowhere and was punching his neck and wrist, and the dude drops an open pocket knife I didn't even see. The guy who hit me tossed me the knife and told me to get in his truck while just basically holding this guy down with his body weight. Of course, as I'm dialing 911 again, this is when the cops decide to show up. There were 2 of them. One ran over to me to try to figure out what was going on, and the other went over to figure out what was up with the guy being held down against his will. They put the guy in handcuffs on the curb and ran some kind of check on him. Turns out he had warrants out in multiple different states for attempted murder and a double homicide. I don't know who the man was that saved me, but I hope he's doing okay today. TLDR. The guy who rear-ended me repaid the debt by immediately saving me from knife-wielding creepo. Also, the cops weren't even there for our accident. They just happened to be passing by on their way to a domestic call. Alrighty, so this is our last story for today. I've had a few scary encounters in my lifetime, but this is the one which comes to mind immediately. I was 14 years old and at the city bus depot. I boarded the bus to go home and was kind of surprised no one else was on it. I sat down, and as I did so, one other person boarded the bus. This man stood out to me immediately because although he was Caucasian, everything about him was extremely dark. Black hair, black eyes, very deeply tanned skin. I felt extremely uncomfortable about him once our eyes met. I felt silly thinking so, but even his aura, I guess, seemed so dark and humorless. He really creeped me out. I broke eye contact, but he never looked away from me. I was trying to appear oblivious to his staring, but I was glancing around to monitor him. This man seemed entirely malevolent and calculating. I could feel him, and it made my skin crawl. I didn't understand why the bus driver wasn't noticing what was happening, and I didn't know how to go to him for any help. Nobody else was getting on the bus at any of the stops. I really didn't know what I was going to do, because it was like this man's intentions were being broadcasted to me directly. He was going to get off at my stop, and he was going to follow me, and he was going to hurt me greatly. I was sweating and feeling sick to my stomach as my stop neared. I wasn't sure what I was going to do because this was before cell phones, and nobody was waiting for me at home. I got off at my stop, and so did he. I walked as if still oblivious until I was sure he was following me. As soon as I rounded the first turn toward my street, I bolted. He gave chase. But I was ahead of him and had an animal panic fueling my speed. I turned around the next corner, which was my street, and a few houses in, I dove behind some hedges. I could now see out, but was relatively certain I would not be seen. If he turned down my street, I planned to run through the backyards until I found a good hiding spot or saw a neighbor. This was the time between after school and the workday ending. I didn't want to lose precious time by knocking on the doors of houses without adults in them if he got near me. I saw the man slowing down from a run. He was looking for me. He spent a while passing back and forth, looking around and down my street. I stayed put until I hadn't seen him for a while, but not so long that perhaps he'd walk the block and might surprise me by coming upon me from the other way. I made my way to my house by walking through everyone's front lawn in case I needed to hide or use a backyard to escape. I ended up making it home without encountering him again. Even as an adult 30 years later, I still occasionally dream about this man. In the dreams, he is simply a slinking ink-black demon in vaguely humanoid shape. And as crazy as it sounds, his presence was so startlingly and plainly evil that I almost think that that's exactly what he was. This was absolutely terrifying, and the fact that you could clearly read this man like a book, and everything you felt about him was exactly right, and I truly believe that that is what saved you that day.
Dark Crossroads Podcast is brought to you by Problem Wildlife. Problem Wildlife serves Western Massachusetts and has been humanely protecting your house and family from unwanted pests for over 20 years. Take back your space with an animal control service that you can trust. They are family-owned, fully licensed, and are knowledgeable and dependable. To find out more about their services, simply visit their website at www.problemwildliferemoval.com. Again, that's www.problemwildliferemoval.com. And the website will also be included in our show notes.
Alright, weirdos, so that's it for our stories today. Next week, we're going to do another themed Creepy Corner episode. I also have another true crime story coming out soon, so check back in for that. And don't forget to rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening to this, and follow us on social media. You can find us anywhere. And don't forget to visit the website, www.darkcrossroadspodcast.com. And if you want to email us, you can email us your creepy stories or true crime stories too. Or if you have any questions or case suggestions, email them to darkcrossroadspodcast@gmail.com. And with that said, don't forget to be weird, stay different, guys, and DTA, like seriously, don't trust anyone.